Dreamers Awake, Chapter 1. Lydia looked at the house. It was short and seemed to be leering at her. The eaves looked low enough to touch with her outstretched hand, and she wondered if she'd hit her head on the way in. She didn't like it. The lift behind her pulled away and the front door opened. A small woman stood there. Her strawberry blonde hair was generously streaked with gray. Green eyes sparkled from a nest of crow's feet, and her mouth was enclosed by a parenthesis of smile lines. Her mother had told her a little about her Aunt Maggie before she died. One thing she had told her was that she was only 3 or 4 years older than her mother, which would put her in her late 40s. Lydia wondered why she looked so much older. "Well," her Aunt Maggie said loudly, "are you going to stand there or come inside the house?" She turned and left the door hanging open. Maggie missed the look of surprise on Lydia's reddening face as she slouched down to pick up her 2 bags of luggage and walked towards the open front door. It was 11 a.m., so Lydia knew if there were any kinds of kids in the neighborhood, they would be at school. They wouldn't have seen that. Even if they were home, they wouldn't have seen it unless they'd been staring out the window. They wouldn't have heard anything unless the window was open. It was illogical, but she was still embarrassed and prayed no one had stayed home sick. She went into the house, pulling her rolling bags behind her, her backpack fat and heavy on her shoulders. Her aunt had disappeared from the foyer. The house not only looked old, but smelled old. Aunt Maggie appeared from around the corner, drying her hands on a towel. Lydia hoisted her backpack higher on her shoulders. Her aunt noticed the motion. When she paid attention, she noticed a lot of things. "First, let's take you to your room so you can get rid of your bags. Follow me." Aunt Maggie turned, tossed the towel on the kitchen counter, and walked through the kitchen to a closed door. She opened it, and a wave of cool air flowed up the stairs. "You'll be down in the basement," she said. Lydia was surprised, but shrugged. She thought there was an extra bedroom upstairs, but maybe she'd been mistaken. She slid the handle of her rolling suitcases away and began to drag it down the bare stairs. "Here, I'll take them. Wouldn't want to scuff the wood." Lydia looked at the stairs, which were badly scratched and damaged. She glanced at her aunt. "That's a joke, Lydia." "Oh, heh," Lydia mumbled. "She speaks!" Aunt Maggie exclaimed. "I was beginning to wonder if you could. Come on." Lydia followed Aunt Maggie downstairs, holding her arms across her chest. She led her across a carpeted basement, past a small open space, a laundry room where the sounds of a dryer running could be heard, and down a short hall to a bedroom at the back. Lydia didn't like basements, especially basements of old houses. They seemed to exude creep, and this one was no different. Aunt Maggie opened the door to Lydia's new room. "You'll be in here. It gets chilly down here, but there's a space heater in the corner, and if you keep the door closed, the room should hold the heat pretty well. There are some quilts in the chest at the end of the bed there in case you get cold, but there's sheets and wool blankets on the bed, so you should be set. It should start warming up here in a couple of months, although probably not like what you're used to in LA, she said. "I thought maybe there would be another bedroom upstairs," Lydia said quietly. "Oh, there is, but it's used for storage." Maggie paused. "Why don't you settle in a little, then come upstairs in a bit? I'll give you a tour of the house and we can have some lunch. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and potato chips." Lydia shrugged. "Okay," she said. "Right, okay. See you in a few." Aunt Maggie went upstairs. Overhead, Lydia could hear the squeaking of the floor as she moved across the kitchen. She hugged her arms across her chest and rubbed them vigorously. They had broken out in little goosebumps. It was chilly down here. She wondered why she had to be in the basement. Most normal people use their basements for storage and upstairs for, well, bedrooms. It occurred to her, however, that little about this whole experience had been normal. Lydia sighed and shimmied her backpack off her shoulders and tossed it on the bed. She went across the room, shut the door, then switched on the space heater. It made a quiet humming, which would be soothing enough to get her to sleep tonight. At least she hoped so. She went back to the bed and opened her backpack, digging around for her sweatshirt. Once she had pulled the teal hooded sweatshirt over her head, she opened her suitcase and the closet. There was a small chest of drawers inside, where she stashed her underwear and bras. She hung up her dresses, which would be way too light for this weather, on flimsy plastic hangers. probably from the dollar store, she thought. She looked around at her half-unpacked suitcase, the space heater quickly warming the room, the simple bed, the chest of quilts. She felt tears sting her eyes, but held them back. She'd already done so much crying. Ever since her mother had been diagnosed, she pushed the thoughts of treatment, the surgeries, the aftermath, the funerals to the back of her mind and wiped her eyes quickly. Lydia pulled a few things out of her backpack and placed them on the bed, a journal, a worn teddy bear, and a small knitted blanket. The journal she placed on the bedside table with a pen pulled from the front pocket of her backpack. The bear and blanket she shoved under one of the pillows. She pulled her phone from her front backpack pocket and quickly sent a text to her best friend, Steph. Made it here. Ugh, it's so old and gross, and I'm freezing. She added approximately 7 frozen emojis and hit send. She put the phone on vibrate and slid it in her back pocket. The creaking and shuffling upstairs had stopped, so she figured her aunt was probably done making lunch. She shut off the space heater and closed her door firmly. The basement was pretty empty except for a few boxes, a small couch, and an old tube TV. Although it was cold and impersonal, it wasn't dirty. There were no cobwebs in the corners, and the carpets were vacuumed and spotless. Despite the cleanliness of the basement, it still felt quite creepy. Regardless of the creepy vibe, she wandered over to the small couch and TV setup. She had only seen these TVs in movies and was curious about it. As she approached, she felt a tingle down her spine and thought she saw the screen flash. What the? She stared hard at the TV screen. The only thing it showed was a reflection of the couch, except now there was someone sitting there. She jumped a bit at the blurred reflection. The face appeared smashed and mangled. The hair stood out at strange angles, as if it had been gelled into spikes. She turned quickly. The sofa was empty. Again, she felt a chill down her spine and walked quickly to the stairs. She took the stairs 2 at a time and closed the door behind her. Ah, good. You can leave that door open if you want from now on. Aunt Maggie paused. I just kept it closed out of habit, but since you'll be living down here, feel free to keep it open. Okay, Lydia said. You all right? Seem a little flustered, Aunt Maggie said. Lydia nodded. Tired from the flight and everything, Lydia said quietly. Her aunt nodded and took a bite of a turkey sandwich piled high with veggies and condiments. Lydia noticed a plate with a much smaller sandwich on it. I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I just put out all the fixins. You can add what you want, Aunt Maggie said. Thanks. Lydia sat down. There wasn't even any mustard or mayo on the sandwich yet. I don't really eat meat, especially lunch meat, Lydia said quietly as she opened the bread and took the clammy meat out from between the slices. Aunt Maggie had taken a bite of her sandwich. Oh! Her voice was muffled by the food in her mouth. She chewed quickly and swallowed. Sorry about that. You can just take it off. I'll use it later. You can have a veggie sandwich then. Lydia looked around at the table. There was lettuce, spinach, tomato, avocado slices, pickles, onions, 2 kinds of cheese, even some jalapenos that claimed they were mild, and some pepperoncinis. Thanks, but I really don't like any of this either, Lydia said. She didn't know why she said that. She did like all that stuff, but for some reason she heard these words escaping her lips and couldn't explain why. Okay. If you don't eat meat and you don't eat veggies, what do you eat? Aunt Maggie asked, putting down her sandwich. I do like this stuff, just like not all together or on this bread. I don't know, I like peanut butter and jelly. Lydia stared at the table, still baffled by her own words. She didn't actually like peanut butter and jelly that much at all. Maybe she just wanted to test Aunt Maggie, see how far she could push her. She remembered her mom saying how obstinate and unkind Maggie was. Aunt Maggie looked at her quizzingly for a moment. All right then, Aunt Maggie said. If you don't like wheat bread, I've got some white in the cupboard. She pointed toward the long pantry door. There's also peanut butter there and some strawberry jam in the fridge. You can help yourself. Lydia didn't move from her chair. She scolded herself and vowed to at least be kind to this woman who was opening her home to her. After all, she didn't know much about her, only secondhand stories from her mom. She would need to get to know her before she drew any conclusions. "It's okay. I'll have this. You already sliced everything up. I wouldn't want to be wasteful." Lydia began to put together a veggie and cheese sandwich, one of her favorite things. "Okay, then." Aunt Maggie shrugged and went back to eating her sandwich. Lydia's phone buzzed, and she pulled it from her pocket. "No phones at the table, please. Family rule," Aunt Maggie said. Lydia held her phone in her hand and watched the little blue light flash at her. "You can be present at a meal for 20 minutes, can't you?" The words stung, not because she thought they were unkind, but because of the phrase family rule. That's something her mother often said. She vividly recalled being 4 and her mother whacking her on the back and using her finger to swipe out a piece of popcorn that had become lodged in her throat while they watched a movie together. "No choking, family rule." She had laughed, even though she'd almost died. Her mother could always lighten a mood. "My mom used to say that," Lydia said quietly. "The family rule thing." "Ah, yeah, our mother used that phrase a lot," Aunt Maggie said. She didn't mention the elephant in the room, that Lydia's mother hardly talked about her family, had never taken Lydia to meet them. There was some secret she had never shared with Lydia. She simply said her family was negative, toxic. She didn't need that kind of toxic negativity in her life. But she'd never said what was so toxic and negative. Lydia could only guess. She went back to making her sandwich. She was starting to feel hungry for the first time since leaving Los Angeles. The wheat bread, cheese, and veggies reminded her of sandwiches her mom used to make, but she felt so far from home here, with the gray clouds, perpetually moist, cold air, and unfamiliar people. She didn't know why she ended up with the toxic, negative person her mother talked about. She hadn't wanted to leave LA, but there was no one there besides her and her mother's friend. That's who she was meant to go to originally, her mother's best friend, Marta. Marta couldn't have children herself, but adored Lydia and had been listed as her guardian in her mother's will since Lydia was a tiny baby. But near the end, Lydia's mother had told her she changed it, and now the responsibility of orphaned child fell on the next of kin. Someone she'd never met in her whole life. Someone she didn't know the first thing about, what she liked, what she hated, would they even get along at all? She'd hoped maybe her father's will had listed Marta as her guardian, and that it would override the wishes of her mother's, but her father had failed to make one. She remembered her mother pestering him about it, but the farthest he got was taking out a life insurance policy. At the very least, she wished she knew why her mother had stopped speaking to her older sister, and why Aunt Maggie lived alone in a big house with a creepy basement. It might have helped when moving out here, but then again, it probably would not have helped at all. Whether she knew or not, she'd still be in an unfamiliar place with unfamiliar people and had to somehow move forward with her life. The basement was even colder at night and decidedly creepier. Lydia hugged a hoodie around her shoulders as she made her way quickly down the stairs. She walked fast and didn't glance at the weird, solitary mini sofa and TV on her right, remembering her experience earlier. She did her best to ignore it and went into her room, closing the door securely. With the light flipped on, she felt a little safer. The room was still unfamiliar, but at least it beat that weird sofa. At least her things were here and some semblance of familiarity. The walls were bare, but Aunt Maggie said they could go shopping this weekend to find posters and art she liked, maybe even a bookshelf if the price was right. The warm glow of the overhead light didn't change the fact that the room was freezing, so she plugged in the space heater and got it running. After that, she closed the curtains and changed into a thin, long-sleeved shirt and sweatpants. How will I survive here after LA? She wondered. She climbed into bed, leaving the overhead light on, but still clicked on the lamp on the bedside table and attempted to read a book for a while before really going to sleep. She glanced at the noisily ticking clock. It read 10:30 p.m. 30 minutes, she told herself. She hadn't read more than a few sentences before there was a quiet creak. She glanced up at the noise. The door hung open a crack. Weird, she thought. She was certain the door had clicked closed. She got up and closed the door, then made her way to bed again. Her eyes landed on the clock, which now read 3:15 a.m. Lydia froze. What in the... She trailed off. She was certain she hadn't been reading that long. certain that she had just sat down. Her mouth still held the tastes from dinner, and the room still felt cold. Or did it? She noticed for the first time that she was sweating, and the room was stiflingly hot. What is going on? She wondered. The door creaked open again, exposing just a crack of darkness beyond. Moving quickly, she flung the door open, hoping to catch her aunt checking in on her. But the hallway was dark and empty. Lydia switched on the hall light and every light switch she walked by on her way upstairs. Again, she ignored the chair and TV, even when a loud creak issued from that corner. She bolted up the stairs and found the door closed, even though she had made a point to leave it open when she came down. To her relief, it opened easily onto the completely dark kitchen. All the lights upstairs were off, and all the curtains were drawn. The clocks all read 3:17 a.m. She crept down the hall to her aunt's room and peered in. Aunt Maggie was quietly snoring and groaning now and then, but it was obvious that she'd been asleep for hours. Her phone sat plugged in and charging on the pillow next to her. The screen was illuminated, and the quiet shh of a white noise machine played from the speakers. There was a nightlight in the room, but her aunt had on an eye mask to block it out. Why doesn't she just sleep with her phone upside down and the nightlight off? Lydia shivered and hugged herself. There was a room right next to Aunt Maggie's that she said was for storage. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't move. Locked. Maybe she could convince her to let her live in that room instead. For tonight, she'd have to make the basement work. Reluctantly, she made her way downstairs. This time, she glanced at the chair and TV. There was nothing there, but for a second, Lydia thought the TV had been on and had switched off as soon as she arrived. Just stop it, she told herself. It was only because it was a new place. Lydia went into the bathroom and brushed her teeth quickly, then went back to her room. The curtains were open. Her eyes widened. I know I closed those, she said out loud. She shivered again and closed the curtains, closed the bedroom door, and placed her empty suitcase in front of it. It wouldn't do much to stop someone who really wanted to come in, but maybe it would stop the draft or whatever was making it fall open a crack. Or I could just leave it open a crack, Lydia said, but then shook her head. She turned off the overhead light, climbed into bed, and clicked off the lamp, glancing at the clock again. 3:30 a.m. She was going to be exhausted for school tomorrow.